welcome to this introduction on Unity and the Unity environment. What we're going to do here is we're going to start off, we're going to walk through the Unity desktop and editor environment. But before that, we're going to start with Unity Hub. So Unity Hub is the manager program that manages all your different versions of Unity installed, as well as the components that you want to have installed with Unity, such as which platforms do you want to publish to, whether it be Android, iOS, Windows, or whatever. So we're going to look at that right now, and then we'll jump into the editor itself. So what you're seeing here is Unity Hub. The first thing you see are your past projects that are open. So what you can do is you just click on any project that you have open and it'll automatically launch. What we'll do is, and then you can also choose the version. Now the reason why you have such a setup here is because when you open a project in a particular Unity version, if you wanted to open up in a newer version, say, then you got to re-import the project. And that could break a lot of things. So developers are typically hesitant to upgrade unless they really, really are sure that it's the right thing to do. So Unity realized that, and then they realized that they had to design an application such as this so that you can actually manage your different versions of installation for the different projects you have. And as you can see here, I have different projects open that are actually under different versions of Unity. Now, before we go into the projects themselves, let's switch over to the installs option here. So I'm going to click on that. And this is where you can manage the different versions of Unity that you have installed. And you can see I have quite a few versions installed here. And then you can actually configure which platforms you want to publish to within that particular version that you have installed. So for example, I'm going to be using 2020.1.17. And if I want to manage the different options that I have within the platform, I'll just click on the three dots and go to Add Modules. I can also uninstall here as well if I don't want it anymore. We'll go to Add Modules, and I can see what I want to add. So right now I have Android build support, iOS, and if you do Android build support, you always should expand the dropdown and actually check off the two sub options here for Android. So the SDK and NDK tools and the OpenJDK. You have iOS, tvOS, and whatever platforms you want to add. You'll just check off the checkboxes and hit done. Go for a coffee while it does its thing and installs. Should take about half an hour to an hour to do an install. So this is where you would configure your different modules that you want to add to your Unity installation. Now, suppose you freshly installed Unity Hub and you want to add anything. You want to add a version of Unity. You'll just hit the Add button. And you can see what your options are right now. So I have the option to add Unity 2020.2. I could go with 2018.3. And I could update 2019.4.18 if I wanted. Pre-releases, you can see the latest pre-release of 2021.1.OB2. So you can actually get some betas here. Now, if you don't see the version you're looking for, because sometimes you want to be able to install a particular version of Unity that's not necessarily the latest, but you just need it, you can go to Unity's website. You can run the downloader and install it that way. So you can search for old installations and find the exact installation version you need and download it through Unity's website. All right. So having said that, I'm gonna hit cancel because I have everything I need here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a fresh project. So let's talk about our projects folder again. And I already mentioned that here are your past projects that are here. So what I want to do now is I want to create a fresh project. So what I'll do is I can just hit new, or it's probably better to just hit the little down arrow next to new, because then you can choose the version of Unity you want to create your project for. So I'm going to choose my latest, which is 2020.1.17. And this window will pop up. All right. So it'll be new Unity project. I'm going to call it M1 Hello World. Make sure there's no spaces. And give it a home. And now I should also mention before I hit create, that you'll see the templates that are here. You're typically just going to choose 3D if you're doing a 3D game. If you're doing a 2D game, you'll just choose 2D game. But you also have the universal render pipeline, the high definition RP options as well if you want to go that way. But I'm just going to hit create, have 3D highlighted. and let it do its thing. All right, after you see the splash screen and you see the little bar that came up that was like kind of like a loading indicator telling you what it was loading, eventually you'll see a Unity desktop environment pop up like this. So we call this the editor in the Unity world, and you can configure your editor any which way you want. You're seeing what my preferred look and feel looks like here, but essentially your Unity editor is fully customizable to you, and you can go any way you want. You can drag windows around, move things around. Like I could take game here, and I'll talk about these different tabs in a moment. I can just drag it here if I want, and I'll probably just stick it there for now. The game, your games themselves are divided into what are called scenes. So your scene could be anything from a loading scene to a level scene, like level 1 scene, level 2 scene, level 3 scene, and so on, end game scene or whatever. And so you're gonna create these different worlds here based on the different scenes that you have open. Now by default, sample scene is created. And what we'll do here is we'll look at all the different windows I have open here. And if there's any windows that you want, you can just go to Window and you can open it up here. And you can add it, you can drag it wherever you want. I'll talk about this again in a second. First, what you see here is the scene window. So you see here that there's scene, and this is where you can drag and drop components, move them around, resize them, adjust them as you see fit. So this is where you're doing your designing. Now, as you saw, I just dragged the game window and I put it down here. So this is basically your simulator, so to speak. So you're going to see that this is where this is your view into the actual game from your user's perspective, your game player's perspective. So you have two different windows, scene and game. They do look similar in a way, but realistically, game is for how your game is going to look to the player, and scene is basically the way where you can edit your actual game scene. Now, beside game scene on the left here is hierarchy, and hierarchy lists out the different objects that you have added to your scene. So right now I only have two by default that are added. So there's main camera and there's directional light. And we'll talk about these two in the next video, what they're all about. So what you can do is as you add stuff, and we're going to add a few things today here, you'll see them all listed out here. You can drag them around above or below because the ordering, your Z ordering, so to speak, especially if you have stuff in front of each other, will be listed out here. And if you want to have one thing in front of the other or flip them around, you just drag them one above the other. So we'll come back to the hierarchy in a moment. You can see here the inspector. This is where you're on the opposite side, on the right side of the scene. This is where you can edit the settings of a particular object you have highlighted. So if I click on main camera, for example, I can see its settings and I can modify them as I see fit. If I click on directional light, I can see its settings and I can modify this as I see fit. So you'll be spending the majority of your time in Inspector. This is where you do the most work because you'll probably be configuring stuff all the time. Now, if I look at Project, which I actually have down here, all right. So Project is like your file navigator. So all the files in your project, you'll see through the project folder. So I can create folders. I can add stuff here. We'll get to this in a moment when we play with some images. We're going to add some images to our project today, and we'll see how to do. And then we'll talk more about images in a future video. Now, there's also console. So console is where your error messages, your debug messages will appear. So you want to have a look here, and you can filter them. So there's these three buttons here that you can filter based on information, error, and warning. Okay, so as you write your own code to support this game, you can actually create your own debug messages to print out just for testing purposes, like almost like a printf sort of a way. Now, if there's any other windows I want to add, I can go to Window, and I'll add one more here. So I'll click on Window. I want to add the Package Manager. We'll talk about the Package Manager in the next video, but I'll just show you here. So when I add a new window, it's going to it'll just pop it up here. And if I want to dock it within any of the components here, what I can do is I can just drag Package Manager. I'll just throw it right there. All right. So now it's going to be always there. And I can flip between Scene and Package Manager, and I can add it anytime. Now we'll talk about packages in the next video, where you can add different components. You can go to the asset store, you can download stuff, and I'll talk about the asset store as well in a future project. So what you'll notice again, like we looked at window here, and we saw we could add a new windows to our editor here. But let's look at some of the other options here. I mean, of course, we have file, which you can use to save your projects and create new scenes and whatnot. Edit, you can do your editing here. Assets. So when we get deeper into assets, we'll be using the assets folder a little more often, especially when we want to add a new package to our project, which we'll talk about in a future lesson. Game object is where we'll be spending a lot of our time. So we'll be adding game objects to our scene, and we're actually going to start adding right now. Before we do that, components. So I can add components to each of the game objects that I want to add to my game. We'll talk about components in a future lesson. But for now, what I'll do is I'm going to open up scene here. So I have scene in view here. What I want to do is I want to start by adding a floor. So let me put window here. So you can see that this is a very generic looking view here under game. And so let's start adding some stuff to it. So the first thing I'm going to add is a floor. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to game object, go to 3D object, and add a plane. And you can see here that it just added a plane. And if I look at my transform here, it's at position 0, 0, 0. So it's dead center of my game world here. All right, rotation, I can rotate this if I wanted to, but I can keep it flat because I want it to look like a floor. Scale. So scale is at 1, 1, 1. I want to increase this. So I'm going to start by increasing this to 100 by 100 by 100. So I'm going to change those 111s to 100, 100, 100. So the thickness doesn't really do much, but you'll notice now, I'll keep the default color here. And you'll notice that I now have a floor, what looks like a floor. Now, if I put a game object and I run it and it has some gravity and stuff, it'll actually fall through the floor. So, but we'll talk about that in a future lesson. For now, we just want to get our hello world up and running. And this is really what it is. It's a hello world here. So now, suppose I want to add some more objects. Well, let's add some basic objects here. Before I do, what you want to do is you want to keep the generic default names. Plane here, I want to give it a proper name. So I'm going to change the word plane here over here to floor. If I hit tab to tab away, it actually saves it. And you notice that in my hierarchy, it is now known as floor. All right. And it's good to name your objects so you don't have the generic names and are confused with, what is this, what is that, and get yourself bogged down with what's going on. All right, so let's try adding some other components here. So I'm going to go to game object, and under 3D object, I'm going to start by adding a cube, simple cube. And you can see it here in our game view. All right, now if I look at my scene view, there's the same cube here. It's kind of cut off though. It's not a uniform cube. It's more like a rectangle, but it's actually an n by n by n cube. But it's just sort of going through the floor there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the arrows here to drag it up. So I'm going to click on the green arrow there. It'll turn yellow. I'm going to pull it up to move it around. Now let's bring it closer to the camera. So I'm going to start by dragging the blue arrow. You notice it's going away now. So that tells me I have to bring it closer. I can bring it closer like that. Now I'll keep it where it is, so I won't play around with the red arrow much. But you can see I can move it around there. Let's play with the rotation. So you can see I have these buttons here in the corner. By default, the move tool was highlighted, but next to it is the rotate tool. So I click on that. My arrows turn into circles. And I can just click on one of the edges of the circle to rotate it accordingly. All right? Or click on, say, this circle. Yeah, I like that. I like that view there. Maybe play a little around with it. If I wanted to take two at the same time, I could click somewhere in the middle. And same with going back to the move tool. If I click on the inner part, like one of these squares here, I can actually move it in 2 directions at the same time. I'll just do a Control Z to put it back where it was. So there's my cube. Now let's add another one. I'm going to add another game object. Go to 3D object. Let's start with a cylinder. So it actually put a cylinder. You don't see it in my game view, but you can see it there in the scene view. And that's because it's actually directly behind the cube. So let's actually, I'm going to move it to the side by using the red arrow there. There, you can see it now. It appears. Let's lift it off the ground. Let's use the blue arrow to bring it closer. Play around with positioning as you see fit. And let's rotate this as well. So I click on the rotate tool. And there. Maybe I'll bring it a bit closer into view. In fact, I can just use the there. Let's add one more. So I'm going to go to Game Object, 3D Object. I'm going to add a sphere this time. And you can see you still don't see it again because it's dead behind the cube. So I'm going to pull it off the ground a bit. I'm going to move it this way this time. There it is. And let's bring it closer. Now you can't really rotate the sphere without it looking the same unless you had some sort of color to it or some sort of texture to it that would actually be discernible. But in this case, it's just a very uniform sphere. So instead of rotating it, I'm actually going to resize it. So if I click on the scale tool, which is this button up here, my arrows turn into these little cubical arrows there. And I can resize it in one direction. So you can see it becomes like that. I'll do Control Z. I can scale it this way. I can scale it this way. But what I'll do is I'll click in the center and scale it uniformly. In fact, I scale it so big that it'll kind of overlap with the floor. All right. So now I have 3 items here, and what I'm going to do is now I'm going to add some color to them. Before I do though, what we've done now is we've added some game objects to our game world. All right, so each of these 3 game objects here, we'll keep it as generic names: cube, cylinder, and sphere. There's also a user interface component to your game world. So you'll notice that in games, you might see like little labels like your time left, your points, your XP, and so on. So let's add a couple of things, as well as some buttons that you can click on to do stuff like you begin a game and whatnot. So we'll do a little bit of a UI introduction here, a user interface introduction, but we'll go deeper into it in the future lesson. So all I have to do is if I want to add my user interface to this, is to go to Game Object, and this time go to UI, and I'm going to start by adding a label, or as it's called here, text. And you'll see down here in the bottom corner, I have in my game view, I have new text, but I don't really see it here. But you'll see that when I added my first UI component in my hierarchy, canvas was also added as well, and my text here is actually right here. And I'm going to start by actually renaming text to be welcome text. Now that's not the actual text. You'll notice that the text still says new text here in the bottom corner. It's just the label for the game object, so I know what text this is. And like I was saying, you don't really see it, but you'll notice that this white box was generated, a really large white box. Now, what I want to do is I'll have to move my game object around. Now, what I do is on my mouse, if you're using an external mouse, a typical Microsoft or Logitech mouse with the wheel in the middle, I'm clicking on the wheel to move, and I'm actually right-clicking now to rotate my view, clicking on the wheel again to move around, clicking on the right-click to move my view, and let's see if we can start seeing. There it is. This is a very large square here. It has to do with camera angles and whatnot, but this canvas, this white box here, this is my UI view. So there's a camera facing this white box that is portraying our view here. Now, if I want to adjust anything with regard to this, now I can do it, because now I can actually see my UI portion. Now, if I want to jump back to, say, the cube, I can just double click on cube, and there I am back in the view there. If I double click on welcome text, I'm back here, but I want to zoom further out. All right, because I want to have a better view of everything. Now, instead of, say, having it in the bottom left corner, suppose I want to have it in the top left corner. Well, if I look under the inspector here, now I can now configure the different settings related to this simple label. Right now, by default, it's in the bottom left corner, but if I click on this square here, I can actually have it hug a different corner. I'm going to have it hug the top right, so I can click on the top right corner there, but you notice it didn't move. I also have to click on the Alt. So hold down the Alt key and click again. So Alt key on the keyboard, click again, and now it's actually moved to the top left corner. I can also stretch it out, I can center it, I can do anything I want with positioning. And then if I want, going back to my move tool, I can drag the arrow a bit, so give it a bit of a padding. So you notice that new text has pushed around a bit. But I want to change this text. So you can see here that text says new text. I'm going to change it to welcome. The text is kind of small, it's kind of bland. My only font available right now is Arial, right? I can actually bring in other fonts into the project, maybe create a subfolder in my project and add fonts, and I can add them this way, but for now, I'll leave it like this, just use Arial. Font size, font style, let's make it bold. All right, font size, it's so small, let's make it to size 50. But you notice that the text disappeared when I made it a size 50. And that's because if I go back to my rect transform up here, my width and my height for the box is 160 by 30, but my font size is 50. So it's already left the screen, or the box is too small for the label. So I'm going to increase the box size. Let's make the height 60. So now you see the text has returned. And the width, well, it's nice to be longer. Let's make it like 300. So that's much better. Now you'll notice that when I change the width, things got out of whack there. But before I readjust things, let's go to alignment. So let's make it center, right? And center it within the box, but it's still kind of cut off. So what I need to do is I need to go back to the square that we played with earlier. So I'm going to click on this again. When I click again, there, nothing happened. I can click on Alt, click again, and now much better. It's a little bit it's trying to maintain some of the padding, but it's also now properly top left corner. I might adjust a little more down. It looks a little high. All right, so that's my welcome label. If we want to change the color, let's change the color as well. So by default, the color is gray. We'll make it there. Let's make it bright red, or a red color. All right, and so there's my welcome label for the game. Now let's also add a button. So I'm going to game object, UI, button. And I'll put a button in the dead center of the game. What I want to do is I want to start by maybe having a bottom center. So I can click on the bottom center, hold down the Alt key on the keyboard now, click again. Now it's bottom center, but I want to give it some padding, so I'm going to drag it up a bit. All right. Now what's interesting about button here is that it's just got a generic name called button. I'm going to change this to be, let's say, click me, but it didn't change the text. And you'll look here, there's nothing here related to text. All right. There's on click, which we'll get into in a future lesson, which is where you can add event handlers to fire. So any methods you want to fire when you click on the button. But we'll talk about that in a future lesson. So I want to change the text right now for button. So you'll notice that click me here has a little arrow next to it. So I click on the arrow, it has its own text component. Click on the text component. Now I have something that's very similar to the text box we just modified with welcome. So I'm going to change the text button to click me. I can change the font and all that sort of stuff like we did a moment ago. I'm not going to. I'm just going to let it be. You can, of course, play with it as you see fit. All right. Now, let's give it a run. So I'll click on the play button. And as you can see, there's not much to see. I mean, I can click on the button now. I can see it sort of flicker there when I click on it. All right. I don't have any movements or anything like that. No animations, nothing going on. Those are in future lessons. But for now, you can basically see your game running. And it'll actually start doing its movements and whatever else you coded into there. So this is the run mode. My screen turned reddish. Yours probably stayed the same. And it was very difficult to tell that you had actually started executing. Now, what I recommend is you actually change the color to be something like how I did. Because if your play mode and your editor mode are the same, so one of the things about Unity is that if you're running your game and you make changes to your game while it's in run mode, and then you stop your playback, you stop running your game, it undoes all those changes. And this is a big painful thing to learn, a painful lesson to learn. So what you want to do is you want to go to Edit, Preferences. And this Preferences window will pop up. Under Colors, Play Mode Tint. Change it to a different color. So I use like a reddish color, pinkish color. But change this play mode tint to something different. Okay, so by default it's probably gray, and you can actually change your background color as well if you feel like it. But you can change any other colors you feel like as well. But play mode tint should be changed to something that is discernible, so you know that you're in play mode, and you can hit stop, or now they're stopping. You just hit the play button a second time to stop your playback. So highly recommend you do that. All right, so what we've got here is we've got our basic hello world. Let's just do one last thing. Let's add some color to a few of the things here. Now, what you'll need to do is you might need to pause this video. You need to grab 3 images or 3 graphics from the internet, or if you have it on your hard drive, great. I want one of those images to be rectangular. All 3 could be rectangular if you want, but just one has to be rectangular to represent this button. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to change this button from being a basic gray button with some text to being some custom color graphic that you have yourself. So at this point, I'm going to assume you have your 3 graphics that you're going to work with. What I'm going to do is we're going to bring them into the project. So I'm going to switch over to the project folder here. You'll notice that I have a very empty project with scenes and just this sample scene Unity file. That's my scene file here. Click back to assets. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click. And this is what's nice about this feature is that sometimes you need to just jump directly into the files, right? Whether it be in Finder if you're using a Mac, or Windows Explorer if you're using Windows. So I'm going to go to Show in Explorer, but you might see Show in Finder if you're a Mac user. And as you can see, what happens is this window pops up. So my Windows Explorer with my project is right here. Now, what I want to do is actually, I'll come back to this in a sec, because what I want to do is I want to show you something here. So I can add files directly in my project, right? I'm going to start by adding a folder. So I'm going to right click on here. I'm going to say create. There's also a plus sign there. Create folder. I'm going to call this folder textures. So my textures is the keyword that represents any graphics, any 2D graphics that I want to add to the project or have in the project. So I click on textures. Now it's empty. Now if I right click here, I go show and explore. I see here my project folder directly pushed into the textures folder. Now any items you want to add to your project must be under assets. Right? And within assets, I have here scenes and textures. If it's outside of the assets folder, it's never going to be added to the project. It's not going to be part of the project. So it always has to be under the assets folder. So textures is now under the assets folder. I already have a few graphics they're going to add in. All right. And in fact, I'll show you what these graphics look like. So I'm just going to click on these three graphics. I'm going to copy them, paste them here. All right, so I have my three buttons there. I'm just going to take these away. Now, if I click back into my Unity editor, it's refreshed and it's added these three images here. Now, I'm just going to bring back Windows Explorer for a second, just to show you that not only has the three files been added to my folder here, but these meta files. Every item under your assets folder has a meta file associated with it. These are like an internal file that's for Unity itself, so that it can, I guess it does what it needs to do in terms of settings for those files. So don't worry about these meta files, but if you delete a file manually, you should delete the meta file to go along with it too. Now, any image you add to your project needs to be configured. So I'm going to start by clicking on this arena play button. When I do that, my properties show up. So the first thing I have to do is change the texture type from default to sprite. All right. And if I scroll down, I have to hit apply. All right. So now Unity can actually recognize this as a proper image instead of just a generic file and actually do something with it. So now I'm going to jump back to my button. So I'm going to click on click me here. Right. Not the text, but the actual click me. And I want to change the graphic here from being a generic, I'll put the game view back on. So from it being a generic, simple button that's stock Unity here, I'll go to source image and I'll click on the circle that's on the end of this and I'll search for my image. It's actually right here. And I'll hit OK or hit X. And now you see that it now looks like my graphic. But you can kind of see the text is still there. So now I have to actually get rid of the text. So I click on text there and just empty out the text box. And there you go. So now I have a proper graphic to represent my button. I can resize this to be a bit bigger. You know, I can all right, so the final thing I want to do is I want to actually add some color to a couple of these items here. So let's start by adding the other two graphics to these, these two items, so the cube and the cylinder. Now I can't just, there's no setting under cube or under cylinder to just take that graphic and put it there. I have to add what's called a material. And the material will represent the graphic that will be, so it serves like the middleman between getting it onto an object and interacting with the physical file that is our graphic here. So I'm going to go back to the project folder and I'm going to right click and say create material. Now I'm going to call this material cube mats. And what I need to do is I need to change the shader for cube mats from standard to unlit texture. When I do that, I can drag one of the graphics over. So I'll just drag my icon there for Monkey Kissing Donkey 2. And now the material has the graphic associated with it. Now let's go back to Cube and let's see what this looks like. So if I click on Cube, you notice that under Materials, I have the default material. If I click on the circle here, click on Cube Material, I hit X, let's find our cube. Now our cube has material. If I look at my game view, the cube is now represented like so. Now, this graphic here actually is a graphic that has a white background as opposed to being like a nice transparent background, as you can see with my button. So don't worry about the white spaces you see in the corner. It's just my graphic as that's representing the whiteness of this. Otherwise, it might look more transparent if you had a proper transparency there. Now let's do it one more time. Let's do it for the cylinder. So I'll go back to Project and go right click, Create, Material. I'm going to call this Cylinder Mats. And go to Standard, Unlit, Texture, and just drag my Code Llama logo for my game Code Llama into there. And so now, if I go back to Cylinder, again under Element 0 for Materials, I can also actually instead just drag it in as well. So instead of clicking on the circle there, I'm just going to take my cylinder mats, drag it, and there you go. And you can see just how it's represented now. Now it looks a lot cooler, right? It has a graphic associated with it. If I look at the game view, there you go. And just for kicks, let's actually drag cylinder mats into the sphere. So click on sphere, drag cylinder mats, and that's what that looks like. So you can see that. If you wanted to compare, you could drag the cube mats, and that's what that looks like now. You can see Monkey's face is just looking huge there. I can actually I can rotate this. So if I go to my rotate tool, I can actually try rotating it. And there you go. Kind of have to catch it there. See if I can rotate a bit more. There we go. There. Now you have a giant monkey staring at you. All right, you can hit run. And of course, nothing's really happening because we haven't really done any actions to this, like animations or played some music. That'll be in a future lesson. But there you go. So now you have a very simple hello world where you've learned how to add a floor. You've learned how to add some graphics, add some items, add some user interface components like a label, like a text label and a button, how to get some graphics, configure it, and you've kind of explored what the Unity environment is. Now, what you always want to do here before we close off for today is that you notice that there's a little star there. Just do a little Control S to save your scene. Always be saving your scene constantly. So don't forget to do that. All right. So the next video will go a little bit deeper. We'll talk about main camera. We'll talk about some lighting next game as well. But until then, take care and talk to you soon. Take care. Bye for now.